Hi there, I'm Napoleon Bonaparte. I was born on the island of Corsica on August 17th, 1769. And 10 years later, in 1779, I started military school. And 5 years later, 4 years later, I became the second lieutenant in an artillery regiment. Then, in 85, I'm pretty sure, when the French Revolution broke out, and seeing my opportunity to rise up the ranks, I started to defend the revolution. In 1793, I put down a royalist uprising in Toulon and got promoted. 2 years later, in 1795, I defended the revolutionary government in Paris and got promoted again. Then, 2 years later, in 1797, when the first coalition started, in French, which was most of Europe's enemies. So, when France started to do good in the war, they sent two big armies up in the north to destroy the Austrians, and me in the south as a diversion to get the Austrians off the big army's tails. But when the big armies were struggling to push into Austrian territory, I zoomed in and destroyed the Austrian army and oversaw the Austria surrender peace treaty to France. Then, 1 year later, in 1798, I started my invasion of Egypt. And then next year, in 1799, one of my men found a Rosetta Stone, which is a very important stone to understanding Egyptian hieroglyphics. But in that same year, on the month of August, in the same year, I escaped back to France. Then, and then in that same year, I became the first consul of France and the leader of the French government. Then, 3 years later, in 1802, I'm sure some of you heard of a thing called the Louisiana Purchase. Well, I'm the one that sold America that purchase. But 2 years later, I became emperor and instituted the Napoleonic Code, which France still uses today. 6 years later, after that, I secured Sweden into becoming an ally to France. But 2 years later, I decided, after Russia opened up its borders back to trade with the British, which was against my national code, international code, I started my invasion of Russia, where I gathered 600,000 men to march into Russia and take it. It was a very bad time, since the Russians used what is called a scorched earth, which meant I have to use my supply trains, and if I use my supply trains, I can't go fast, which was one of my main tactics in defeating all my enemies. But we still made it to Moscow, where the Russians finally started to fight instead of flee. And we won easily, but with a cost of some of my men. But when it became winter, when it was the start of winter, after failing to see any sign of attack from Russia or peace treaty from Russia, it became winter, and I saw that we had to go out of Russia immediately. So me and the rest of my forces at Moscow continued to start the journey back out of Russia. Along the way, the winter killed some of my men, and surprise attacks from the Russians also killed more of my men. And in the end, I only had 100,000 men left after I escaped Russia. Then, 2 years later, in 2 years later, in 1814, I got exiled to Elba, where I became Emperor of Elba and improved infrastructure and a lot of things in Elba to make it a lot better. But 1 year later, in 1815, I escaped from Elba, and when King George the 18th came, sent 1,000 men and to go and arrest me. But still being angry with the new king's rule, they joined my side and started shouting, "Long live the emperor!" In that same year, I faced off in a battle called the Battle of Waterloo, where the British forces overpowered me, and I got exiled to St. Helena, where for the last 6 years of my life, I spent there until I died of stomach cancer in 1821.